I'm Angus, the creative director of DarkMatter.
We can't train people to adopt the same soft skills or the same attitude towards the application of their soft skills in those contexts.
I loved what you had on your guys' website, leading the change to a skills-based workforce.
COVID was a catalyst that I think for many people really hammered home where loyalties really lie.
It's about how do we use the group mentality to solve the predicament that we're in. And you're listening to the Blood, Sweat and Ideas podcast. Welcome to the Blood, Sweat and Ideas podcast.
Thank you.
Andy Kepler, the co-founder of Kepler Co, or Kepler Plus Co, how would you say it?
Well, so we say Kepler Co. It was actually an art director who came in and figured the ampersand was a little bit dated and it looked a bit more visually strong, but we still say it as and.
No, I like it. I think having done research into this conversation ahead of time, I think you guys have got a very strong brand identity, very modern. That's why I was also a little bit surprised, and I'll swing it over to you just to give a little bit of an explanation into it for people who don't know you and your business. But very surprised to find out you only started essentially last year, February.
Yeah.
Which is remarkable because it looks like it's got longevity already within it, which I guess is the way you've decided to build it. And like you said, it's the convergence of your specialities and your co-founder, Darren, you said.
Yeah, that's exactly right, yeah.
So maybe just tell us a little bit more about Kepler Co.
All right, so Kepler Co was born out of, a random, meeting between two like-minded people. So Darren was working very much in the education space and encountering a lot of this sort of rhetoric and the platitudes and repetitive sort of echo chamber conversations within that space, and he was looking to move into own technology. I was running a software consultancy that was building banking software, but had a great deal of success and fun in an adult financial literacy app that we deployed for one of our clients. And that experience was just this amazing pivot moment. It's like you can only do so much good in finance. Your hands are very tied. But in education, you've just got this amazing, growing opportunity space, and you can actually feel good about what you do on a daily basis.
Necessity to do so.
Yeah. So we met up, and essentially we wanted to solve for the problem of transitioning from a qualification-based hiring practice and corporate culture to a skills-based hiring practice. No more relevant degree essential crap. And it very quickly became apparent that there was this massive disjunct between the decision-making around people's career mobility and next steps and the learning and skills that people had. There was all this quiet competence that was going completely unrewarded because empty vessels make the most noise. And, we've all been in a boardroom where half of the people in the room are throwing around jargon very effectively, but
acronyms.
Yeah, and you're just sitting there going like, that's not really what that word means, but I'm not going to be the guy who says that. And so how do we make people's opportunities in businesses tied into the reality of their skill sets? It's better for the business too. Yeah,
it's longevity for that, right?
Yeah, so that was initially the kind of space that we decided we were going to play in. And as we've been digging into that, we started to realize how uncontested that area is. A lot of people are talking the talk and speaking about these transitions, but mostly from massive companies, Titanics, that just can't necessarily
move in an agile way. Yeah.
Exactly. So for them to realign from these traditional ways of thinking about hiring practices and people management and development, and it's impossible for them to make that pivot. So smaller startups actually have an incredible opportunity in that space at the moment.
Yeah, well, I mean, you can. If you're starting a business now, and I think this is the hope from this podcast and this conversation, is to any entrepreneurial business SME that is starting out, they hear this and they understand the value of it, and they start instilling this into their company now, either through your business, obviously, or just understanding the necessities of like better EQ, understanding the soft skills, developing the team skills.
Absolutely. And the reality is you don't need software to do this.
Yeah.
But even within our company, we found that the vocabulary to have these conversations just isn't there. It's not the way that so many people have been raised. I find like the younger people coming into the organization are very much geared to this mindset of attacking a skill that they know they need and acquiring that skill and then moving on. Like there isn't this reliance. I mean, two of our strongest developers, both homeschooled, no tertiary qualifications whatsoever. They just know how to self-manage and define their trajectory. And when they go through exercises of, trying to discuss the skills that and competencies that actually define what they do on a daily basis, they do it with fluency. You find the seniors have a lot more trouble actually verbalizing
to articulate that.
Yeah.
But I think that's like an inherent quality of the type of person that is a web dev, because that story that you just shared mirrors our senior web dev in our team, who's the lead now.
Yeah.
Shout out to James. I know wherever you are behind your computer, no doubt. Also, self-trained, found it interesting, started to be a designer. And I remember he told me this story. He started to be a designer, had to do some web dev design work, and then it just triggered his interest. He's like, what's this code? What is this? And he self-taught him stuff, all of this, to the point where he's now, our go-to guy for any web dev thing, and he's always ready to upskill and get onto the next level, the next thing that needs to be. And it's just remarkable because he also doesn't have a tertiary education on that level.
Yeah.
He just has that ability and that attitude to, cool, what do I need to know and how do I learn it and how quickly can I adapt it?
Yeah, and I mean, it's a space where things are becoming redundant on a 3-year cycle. Languages we were using 5 years ago are completely redundant. What we'll be using 5 years' time probably
hasn't even
doesn't
been coded
exist
yet.
Yeah. Just further and further layers of abstraction are also making it much more accessible to people. So, to be a programmer, to be an engineer, you really just need to have the ability to continually learn and adapt. And that mindset of completion, of learning completion, just doesn't seem to exist in that space. Or if it does creep in, that's generally when people transition to, leading or architecture.
Yeah, you're using a different set of skills,
right? Infrastructure side of things, because I think it's a fatiguing process. I think you do need a really energetic mind and outlook to be able to
continue. A very
inquisitive
mind.
Absolute curiosity.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
What was it? Says that saying? Curiosity killed the cat, and then something revived it. Can't remember the full. There's a full. Everyone knows curiosity killed the cat. And then there's another part to that quote. It's something like, but hope revived it or something crazy.
Oh, man, I'm going to Google that because...
We can Google it now.
I love sayings like
look,
that.
our sound person's on it.
Thank you.
It's like, what's the guy in Joe Rogan's podcast? Like, Jimmy, can you pull it up?
And they're on the ball. In fact, they're already searching for it at the moment.
They already know.
There's uncertainty.
It's a cat. Okay, let me Google.
It says, well, curiosity killed the cat, but satisfaction brought it back.
Satisfaction brought it back.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's fascinating. It's like jack of many trades, master of none, but many trades is better than one. Or
see, I don't know the complete version of that.
Great minds think alike, but fools seldom differ. It's like we always leave out the most important part. The punchline is just forgotten because, the convenience of great minds think alike is so self-congratulatory.
Yeah.
Let's not cast any doubt.
It's our attention span. We could only remember the first part of it, right? That's what we've gotten to.
Yeah.
It's the same with that story with Icarus, and it says, don't fly too close to the sun because the sun will melt your wax and you'll fall into the ocean. But the other side of that story is if you fly too low to the ocean, the wave will capture you too.
Wow.
So it's like, why do we only know the ones we can't ascend to higher heights? Because if you do get too high, then you're going to get burned. But if you try to do nothing, you'll
drown.
Yeah. So
it's like the statement implies moderation.
Yeah. Balance, I guess.
Mediation. Yeah. That's a great one. I didn't actually know that.
You see, look, we only ever learn on blood, sweat, and ideas. I think it's great. Thanks for that rundown of Kepler Co. I mean, we'll obviously have all your details there for people to go find out and know a little bit more about it. Just want to bring it back to your side of the story, right? So you have this ability or this skill, right, in developing apps or developing solutions, technology, using modern ways of using technology to ascertain things, right? Using that in banking, fintech primarily. Where was this like shift in your mind where you just had to like get out and do something that you could do more with the tools at your disposal? What was that moment for you?
Well, it's always an uncomfortable thing to be sandwiched between what's good for the customer and good for the organization. You're always trying to play it safe, find a middle ground, but a bank benefits from impulsive decision making. They make more money when people make bad decisions. Yes, repossessions aren't something that they want. It has legal costs, but in the most part, someone making an impulsive decision, taking up a loan that has a high rate, these are the things that benefit the bank's bottom line. You look at COVID when we went into stage 5 lockdown. Any business, any bank that was primarily focused on asset finance tanked. And all of the lending, all of the credit facilities turned massive products. So you found business units that were traditionally fairly stable, like dropping massively, and the ones that were there to provide quick access to cash, they skyrocketed. And that was always an uncomfortable space for me. And then we got the privilege, and nothing short of an absolute honor to work on it. In South Africa, we have legislation that informs banks, that enforces banks spend a proportion of their net profit on adult financial literacy.
Okay.
For obvious reasons. We've got a massive imbalance to redress. But at that time, and I think there has been a shift away from that, I have to be fair, but I mean, this was a good few years ago. At that time, banks were primarily like checking a box. It was like, well, we'll put up a billboard. We got a couple $1 million to spend. We'll throw some ads up on radio. We'll spend the money and we'll call it done. And we started doing some research there. And I mean, in an OECD study on adult financial literacy, where they surveyed 30 different countries, South Africa included, and I'm developing and developed world countries. And it's not like we were being compared to Germany and like Holstein. We ranked the lowest out of all 30 of those countries for financial literacy. It included Tanzania, Kenya, Nigeria, as well as European, American, and South American countries. So really great spread of countries, and we were absolutely the worst.
Terrible, but there's the opportunity. Ding,
absolutely.
Ding, ding.
Yeah. Highest Gini coefficient, greatest disparity between rich and poor, and not just what you would think as a sort of legacy of an oppressive regime. The financial literacy was equally low at all areas of society. The difference being that wealthier areas of society made massive mistakes with great levels of confidence. So they feel like they should know what they're doing, and they make these massive idiot moves. So it was this problem that needed to be solved at all levels, but also had a massive amount of benefit that could be delivered. So we took the approach of building a digital product that would be able to use things like Bayesian knowledge tracing.
What's that?
So it's essentially, you want to be able to predict the pace at which people acquire and retain knowledge.
Okay.
And there's a thing called the forgetting curve. So, people forget at a certain pace as well. And that's where interval reinforcement comes in. So, if you think to the traditional school system, you've got learn through test, learn a bit more term 2, prelims, learn a bit more term 3, test, learn a bit more final exams. That interval reinforcement, that repetitive testing of the subject matter and the revision is really what entrenches the knowledge. It's what ends up with the knowledge being in long-term memory. So with knowledge tracing, you can start to get pretty predictive about when people are going to forget something and when they need a reminder. So we looked at those things to make it possible for us to do more than just check a box and really prove that users were learning, that they were remembering, and that they were increasing the complexity of their application of the concepts that they were learning. So we built a cognitive scaffold going from the minutiae, the micro concepts, the things like, what even is credit? Like, what is a credit bureau? You can't jump in halfway through the syllabus. You need to have that
foundation before you can actually extrapolate.
So we stage-gated, and people had to, make it through certain, like, gamified quiz-based levels to get to the more complicated stuff. And they went through basic concept to application in more complex situations, and then, proving that they could answer those same questions accurately months later, we got to really show the benefit of meaningful financial literacy. And that experience was enough to make me just go, this is not where we should be. So we started looking at opportunities in the education space to take that experience that we had built up forward and continue with the enjoyment of actually knowing that you're doing something that can be purely good for the people that are experiencing it, not something that has a darker side that you're trying to mitigate. And that moment was a pretty big awakening for me.
What a massive leap. I think it's profound what you're actually doing and how you're utilizing the software and the technology to track that and monitor that, and then you're building it into like you say, a gamified experience. So then it becomes even more, people invested even more to learn it and play with it. And I think that's maybe sometimes when you learn the most is when you play a game, right? When you have fun.
Absolutely.
Play is learning.
Yeah, especially in a competitive environment. I mean, that's another thing is we're innately competitive beings, and in competitive quiz-based environments, there are a number of studies.
I'm going to have you on my quiz team. I think that's what I need right now.
As long as we don't have sport questions,
I'll
really
handle those and stress.
At others, but it's a fascinating thing how much more receptive we are and how much more indelible the memories are from a competitive scenario than we are from a non-competitive scenario.
But I do think there's something, it's so super important, because we at DarkMatter, we also, I think we put a huge emphasis on upskilling our team, right? Because we're quite we're a nimble, small agency, and the only way we can develop that is through skills training. And a big thing that we've adapted or started to look into for our team is these AI tools, right? Yeah. So obviously the floodgates have opened. They've been developing for years. Now it's come through in mass. And what we're trying to figure out in our team is, if you don't, like you were saying with the code, there's languages that haven't been created yet in the next 5 years. Same as if you don't adapt to this new way of using the tool, you're going to be left behind, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to find that balance of use the AI as a tool to get a start, but it still comes down to the person at the end of the day to edit, curate, put the human touch on it. Because it's someone was telling, we were having a conversation yesterday, and the guy was saying, everyone's talking about AI and how it's going to replace humans, but we've had AI competing against chess grandmasters for I don't know how many years, right? That's been something that has constantly been evolved, but nobody goes and watches an AI computer play an AI computer. People go and watch two people play chess against each other. Hikaru and Cole Magnuson, right?
Though there is
Magnus Carlsen, I always forget his name.
Yeah.
I don't know which one it is.
There is a trend now to have teams play AIs. That's something that I didn't realize until quite recently, and it was mentioned in a book that I'm reading, where they'll take people with cognitive diversity, different backgrounds, different skill sets, and they'll collaborate on playing the AI, and finally we're able to beat the AI at chess.
So that's what, five heads are better than one.
Exactly. Yeah. One of the things that I'm very concerned about with AI is just not to get, and any emerging technology is to let the science lead. There's a lot of rigorous academic study in the use of these technologies that either confirms or debunks their use in certain contexts. And it boils down to that human layer that you mentioned coming back in. If I was to go to ChatGPT now and say, kick out a list of skills for this person in this role, and I was to take it to them and say, here's a list of 10 skills, I expect you to show me progress in 6 months. Versus sitting down with the person and saying, where do you feel you want to go? What skills do you think you need to develop to get there? How can we help you? How can we find a middle ground between where you think you could add value and where we need value? That's a conversation that makes a person feel heard.
Yeah.
The use of AI can be really great in helping people in managing complexity, helping them get to the end result quicker and more accurately. But if that human layer is lost, we dehumanize people. It's like human resources, terming people resources. It's like an unpleasant way to anchor your view of a person, referring to users on a system.
Yeah.
It's a dehumanizing term, and it becomes, we sort of paint everyone with the same brush.
Yeah.
And there's also the risk of over-engineering things. Sometimes a conversation will do 1,000 times more for a person than any number of AI-driven recommendations. So it's, for me, a question of choosing when to use things.
When is the human interaction at its utmost importance? So before we took the break, we were talking about the human touch, right? What is your focus? I want to ask you two questions. What is the importance of EQ currently for businesses, right? And what are the most important soft skills that someone can develop today to work effectively in a business as an employee? And what are the most important soft skills that an employer can have in a business today? So your leadership.
Wow, that's a very good question. I think the answer is distinctly different depending on which side of the conversation you're looking at. From an employer's perspective, there are some universals which I think are going to be valuable. A sense of ownership, a sense of responsibility. Those kind of things are going to be universally relevant. But the culture within the business and the soft skills required to thrive there are linked. You can't divorce those two things. A business that has a legacy mindset that are very hierarchical and use channels of authority to keep people in line and keep them in their lanes, and don't welcome critique or meritocracy. They can't train. We can't train people to adopt the same soft skills or the same attitude towards the application of their soft skills in those contexts as we would people in a smaller organization that's very forward-thinking and has a high level of EQ. You've got to wear a different mask in these two different environments, and it's a difficult thing because when it comes to behavioral assessment, there's a great deal of, I don't want to say pseudoscience, but there's a big distinction or a disjunct between the academic literature and study that's at the forefront of an understanding of those skills in the human mind, and the technology that's available and the companies
to implement it.
Exactly, and the methods to assess it. So, in speaking with a behavioral psychologist recently, he mentioned to me that the sole reason that he gets brought in to run things like Myers-Briggs or 16 personalities is risk mitigation, is liability concerns.
Interesting.
You're hiring a C-level exec, you want to make sure you're not getting a psychopath, basically. I mean, in the extreme.
In the extreme,
In the extreme. But, you're trying to manage risk, and you're using a method that is a black box to you, that's maybe a little bit legacy in its mindset. It's not at the forefront of where...
Well, it's not at the forefront now.
Not now.
But when it came out, that was groundbreaking, right?
Absolutely. But they're, by default, fairly lacking in actionability. A lot of these things, the result is a bit of a, and now?
Yeah, what do we do with this?
What do we do with this? So it's very difficult for me to, first of all, make that clear distinction. It's not universal, and that context and the success within that context isn't the same for everyone. That's one major thing. Another thing, when it comes to EQ in business, I think if you look at the conversation around leadership in business and the movement away from the term manager and these views of traditional hierarchies and a more inclusive or supportive view of a leader within a business as a facilitator, those conversations are becoming more and more prevalent online, social media. You've got influencers on all of these platforms pushing this notion really hard. And I think inevitably that is going to have an impact. And it's not 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. I think historically we're moving inexorably towards a more employee, human-centric, humanist workplace. COVID was a catalyst that I think for many people really hammered home where loyalties really lie. we've been moving away from that sort of boomer mentality of working at a corporate until you die on your
get
desk.
the Rolex and then you're
that we've been moving away from that for years. But working from home for so many people, you're surrounded by your kids, you're surrounded by your family. That's the constant. That's what's going to be there tomorrow. And in that context, employers need to work a lot harder to make sure that they're providing an environment that people want to be a part of. And the responsibility needs to shift from the employee to fit in to the employer providing an environment that anyone can live within and feel happy, a purpose-aligned organization. So, I think EQ is everything. To be honest, it's more of a factor today than, IQ would have been the main thing. Absolutely. And EQ moves the needle in teams almost as much as IQ. I'll send you the link to the research on that. I'm drawing a blank on the guy's name, but one of
it'll appear here.
Somewhere on screen there'll be something you can click on. Yeah. But behavioral competencies impact team performance as much as IQ.
And that makes sense though. It's like, you said it before, like if you have a toxic person,
absolutely,
that's going to hinder a team's ability to actually get work done.
Yeah.
And then inversely, when you have a positive environment around the team, like work doesn't feel like work sometimes, because you're all in this together. But going to what you were saying, it reminded me of a Richard Branson quote, which I'm sure you know: train people well enough so they can leave, treat them well enough so they don't want to.
Absolutely, yes. Similar to, what happens if we train them and they go, and what happens if you don't and they stay.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That's actually another one that I have.
Yeah. Studies have shown that there's a huge correlation between workplace satisfaction, morale, and being invested in, and feeling seen and being given opportunities. A culture of ongoing learning can be quite an ostracizing factor too for some people. But in the most part, if you feel seen and invested in, and that is going to spur you on to better things. It also boils down to, ultimately, who are you responsible for?
Yeah.
Like in our team, we've always tried to have a mentality of responsibility to the product and no siloed handoffs. It's not like, well, I did my job right, it's not my fault it failed.
The difference between abdication and delegation.
Exactly. And when a junior feels empowered to say this is a dumb idea without fear of any form of punitive action, when a 20-year-old newbie in the team can say to the CEO, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard, in exactly those words, and not fear any form of negative fallout from it, that's when you're working in the right direction. That's when people can actually contribute and help make a product good, not just stroke an ego.
Be honest.
It's an interesting one because there's a lot of analysis paralysis
yes.
in implementation of learning programs at corporate. And people end up in these sort of recursive debates about, but is it knowledge, or is it a skill? Is it a competency? Is it a soft skill? Is it a behavioral skill?
Nature,
Should
nurture.
we call it human skills? So what? Who cares? Just move forward and do something. Take a step forward and figure it out as you go. And that competency skill debate is one that rages and not everyone agrees on. And I recently saw a description for it which finally came home to roost for me, which was the competency is the toolbox and the skill is the hammer. If you're a
competency, let's just say that again. The competency is the skill box.
The toolbox.
Is the toolbox.
It's essentially the cluster of skills that make
everything bundled in, all of the different things together.
So you're a UX designer. UX as a competency is comprised of multiple skills that break down to infinitely smaller dimensions. Some of them are empathy, some of them are softer things. Others are technical skills like your use of different tools.
Design thinking.
Yeah, and processes, knowledge, those kind of systems for structured thought. To isolate them is another debate. Like how can you be a UX designer without empathy? How can you be a surgeon without empathy? Do you benefit from the same level of empathy in application of both? Probably not. So if you look at UX design as the toolbox, then Figma is the tool, the skill. which was the first time that kind of distinction started to feel somewhat real for me. Now, the question we also have to ask is, when we look at assessment, how valuable is an assessment at that micro level in all cases, and how often should we be looking at the competency holistically? For example, if you take a role-based approach, like looking at job title and person with skill set, you might identify certain gaps in your organization. You're like, oh, you know what, guys, we don't have anyone who does DTP, and occasionally we need to send something to print. You don't need a DTP designer to sit just for like that job.
Waiting around.
Someone who once did it and still knows how to do it is there.
Yeah.
Like these competencies don't have to be associated with people. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one match. And you can have your team comprised of multiple roles that are completely divorced from job title. Job title is, it's a bit of a
Blasé.
It's really just like an ego trip, and there's so much variation in it that it doesn't really hold much weight in terms of what you actually do on a day-to-day basis.
I mean, I know mine doesn't incorporate half of what I actually need to do on a day-to-day basis.
I make way too much tea.
Chief tea creator.
CTO. Chief tea officer.
I like that. You got a CCO? So funny story around that is a very, very good friend of mine. He was at boarding school and he was in grade 8 or whatever it is. And the matrics were like, hey, you, go make us tea. They gave him all the orders. And he must have had to have made 12 cups of tea at that time. And he's a very, very, very smart guy. And he sat there with these 12 mugs in front of him. And he thought to himself, if I do this really well, they're going to ask me to make them tea every single time. But if I don't do it really well, and I put salt instead of sugar, and I put cold water instead of hot, they're never going to ask me again. And that's what he did. He used his skill, or his competency, to know that this skill is not something you want to be known for. And he messed up the order, gave it to the matrix, and they all tasted it like, what the hell is this? And he said, well, that's how I drink my tea. And they're like, no, that's terrible. And they pointed to another grade 8 and they said, you, go make us tea. And that kid jumped, said, how would you like it? And then that kid made tea for the rest of the year. And I just love that story because it's like, use it wisely, you know. Obviously, it's it's a positive thing if you can make a good cup of tea for the CTO. But if that's what you want to be doing,
you set a precedent.
Yeah, you set a precedent. So obviously, we've been discussing the soft skills, the EQ, the impact of leadership. I want to ask you, what is your personally, what is your most important skill that you possess? And how do you influence that in your business today?
I've been thinking about this one. And I find it very difficult to compartmentalize. I think, I could say communication. I study drama. And I honestly think if I didn't, I wouldn't be as good as...
This is a professional actress behind you.
That's awesome, yeah. I mean, but no, I mean, in truth, it equips you with a huge amount of communication skills, the ability to manage nerves, the ability to communicate to large groups of people. I mean, I couldn't go into a conference and give a talk if I hadn't done that. So those skills are massively important. And I suppose they boil down to communication skills. But honestly, I think at this point, emotional regulation starts to become the biggest factor, being able to switch on and off emotional responses in particular instances. It's like you were saying, you come into work, you're having a bad day. These things happen. Not every day is this inspired, hop, skip, and jump. Sometimes it is torture, and you can put on a mask. You can wear a role. You can play the character, And if you've got that, you can rely on processes to maintain quality and make sure the job is done right. But that regulation, that sort of the ability to kind of govern how you respond to external stimuli is probably what I would say is the most important.
I like that. Your emotional regulation. It's like reminds me of control the controllables.
Yeah.
You know, if you let things that are so far out of your ability to, actually have an impact on it, it's only going to eat you up inside. It's only going to lead to more of your attention span or your battery. Like the way I like to look at it is you start every day with a fully charged battery, and how much energy are you going to give to these different things? And it's like you often see people who get anxious and anxiety over things that they can never control. And it's like, but why are you giving that thing power? Because you can't impact it or affect it in any way, but it's not affecting you. And I think the sooner, I don't know if it's because I'm getting older, but I think the older you do get, the more you realize, cool, that's fine.
Not the end of the world.
Not the end of the world. When I worked at Standard Bank, there was a senior in the team, and we were in line at the VD cafe to go get a coffee. And I just happened to be behind them in the queue, and this person ran up, and they're like, I can't remember the name, Stacy, I need to tell you now, I need to tell you something now. And then she turned and she said, is the Standard Bank stock price going to collapse? I said, no. I said, then I can wait until my coffee's done. I was like, that is so cool.
Absolutely.
Is it urgent? Is it important? Yes. Is it urgent? No. Put it into your matrix, right?
Yeah.
And I just think the more you can practice that, and obviously that's someone with a very senior level, probably seen the stock price take a tumble, so they know. But those are those like things being a fly on the wall and like being privy to and just seeing. I wasn't meant to see that, but I happened to. And it's like just that moment is just stuck with me. And it's so true. It's like worry about things that you can worry about because you can actually implement change to it.
Yeah, and it does. I mean, control is a wonderful lever in it. I mean, we all want agency. We all want to be in control of our lives. And so often we blame our reaction to external stimuli on the stimuli. There was a anger management coach in the US who does anger management classes for violent offenders in like high security prisons. And these are guys who have incredibly difficult upbringings, and they're not in control of their reactions, and a lot of them are in prison because of impulsive, aggressive reactions that they had to certain circumstances. And nothing was getting through until he phrased it from a point of view of power, of giving away control, of giving the power to the person who, when you phrased it within that context, these hyper-aggressive individuals were able to really internalize that message. And because it was phrased from that position of control, it really resonated and managed to have huge benefits. Now,
more profound impact.
So now that process, that methodology of teaching anger management in those circumstances is becoming more and more prevalent and having a much broader effect.
And to me, it just sounds like such a simple shift.
So simple, yeah.
So simple. Sometimes the simplest things are the most profound.
Yeah,
right?
we tend to over-engineer things.
I mean, saying that, I loved what you had on your guys' website, leading the change to a skills-based workforce. Looking at South Africa as the microcosm, and this is why we've created this podcast, is for there's not enough content around South Africa. There's not enough of these narratives about entrepreneurs in South Africa talking about South African problems and challenges. And we know we've got a lot that we face. But is one of the biggest the lack of education in this country for future workforces? Because obviously you want to develop skills, but if there's not a solid foundation in which people's education can be built upon, how far can that skill, there needs to be a bridged gap. There needs to be, the chasm needs to close because it's just widening. And you said earlier we were ranked 30 out of 30. So it doesn't look good in like what I'm hearing or what I think.
So I would say that there are a couple of major problems. For one thing, our education system lacks the agility to adopt new concepts in teaching. Quite understandably, it takes time to revise your curriculum, to revise teaching standards. Schools are underfunded. Teachers are stretched too far. And that results in a considerable lack of continuous professional development or engagement. It also creates a mindset where learners aren't customers and teachers aren't providing a service, where the power dynamic is very much in the hands of the teacher, and any form of like neurodiversity, any kind of otherness is just too much and can't be accommodated. So I think there's a lot of problems that we have in the fact that our schools are so underfunded and that our educational frameworks lack the agility to adapt these new ways of thinking. But even in countries where that's not a problem, in universities that give top quality degrees, there's still a lag between what they're teaching and what's being used.
And what the real world is actually representing.
Yeah, so like I studied fine arts. They cover professional practice in fourth year for a very short period of time. You're cast out into the world to now go and speak to gallerists, try and get, in with gallery owners and get into art shows and curate and all of these things, but you've been given 5 minutes of professional practice training. Darren's experience as a CA, very similar. I mean, he finishes a degree, qualifies as a CA, takes his first job, and hasn't been taught how to use Excel. So even in situations where people are going through quality education in contexts where they are treated as a customer, we're just not keeping pace with the demand for innovation and change.
So what's the solution to that? Like, how do we create an education system that's already so backlogged and stretched? Now, how do you create agility within that to solve this problem? Because if it's not solved sooner, it's just going to become a widening gap.
Well, there's a but to it. There was, ultimately, yes, there are all these problems, but we have a resilience. We're raised in hardship. We're raised in a country where it's difficult to thrive, and that resilience that's bred into us makes us incredibly valuable problem-solving individuals. So, I think a tendency that I would say is prevalent in South Africa is a decision to solve the problem for yourself, which is wonderful. You end up with people who are able to create these skill sets themselves, identify places that they want to be themselves, but access funds, data consumption, all of these things are factors that limit that. And if people aren't necessarily given enough of a grounding to even know what they need to know or what they don't know, then there's that gap that needs to be bridged. But the rest of the world has a declining population, not the rest of the world, but a large part of the developed world has declining youth populations, aging populations. Yeah, Europe, massively aging population. Africa is
youth development.
Yeah, we are the intellectual capital that will drive the world in the next 30 years. It's an incredibly inspiring concept. But how do we keep those people here? The brain drain and the pull of consistent electricity supply is enough to get people out. So anyone who can is likely to consider
taking the opportunity to go.
And it's no longer the same conversation it was 20 years ago. Now it's become a very different decision for people, and it's no longer so couched in politics. So how do we keep people here? How do we create opportunities for them? How do we dismantle systems that block people from access to this information and create systems that provide that access? And across the entire African continent, that's a situation that we need to start solving for. Otherwise, the value of the brain power and resilience that we have as a people, as a culture, is just going to be eaten up by already developed world countries. It's just going to further create the divide. It'll just entrench it. So I honestly don't have any major solutions, but I think we have a tendency to self-solve and not collectively solve. So, for me and mine, I'm going to do this. How do we start to embody a culture where we take that one step further and try bring people along for the ride?
Do you not think that's what Ubuntu is founded on?
I believe so.
Yeah.
I believe so. Yeah.
So maybe that needs to almost be something that is more profoundly extrapolated and taught, more of a problem-solving solution, more than just an ideology of, community and collective. It's about how do we use the group mentality to solve the predicament that we're in a positive way, using the soft skills or the hard skills.
And overcome our learned helplessness. That's another thing. We need to really believe that we can make a change. And it's, some of this believe it and visualize it and it can become true. It feels very soft and very pseudoscience.
Ethereal.
Yeah, it's but on a very practical level, if you believe you can achieve something, you take steps to achieve it. You're not daunted by it. If you don't believe there's any hope of achieving the thing, the natural tendency is to not try.
Yeah, you're not going to start.
It's not ethereal at all. It's an entirely practical reality of the way that humans behave. So if we can truly believe that we can achieve it, then we might actually try. If that happened, it would be incredible.
We are coming to a close, and there's a few things here. So we have a tradition on our 124th podcast that we've launched, is that we asked the guest, what is your question for the next guest? So we had a lovely guest on the previous episode, and she asked me to ask you, not knowing who you were. What did she ask me to ask?
Knowing all that you've achieved now, looking at yourself 5 years ago, what advice would you give him?
So maybe repeat that for the listeners.
Okay, so
this should be my job, but I'm handing it over to you.
yeah. Okay, so where I am now, what would 5 years ago Andy have said to me now?
No, what would you say to 5 years ago Andy?
Oh, okay.
So
that's a much more interesting question.
It's a hard question.
I have a lot of things I'd say to 5 years ago Andy, but that's an incredibly interesting question.
If you want to break it into professional to personal.
To be honest, I think you maybe stumbled right into somewhere where the answer exists, is that if you believe you need work-life balance, maybe you're doing the wrong thing for work. Maybe if you were doing something you really loved, there wouldn't be a need for balance because it would be one
it's
consolidated
Sure.
whole. And my question or statement to myself would be, if you feel like you need to maintain a balance between your work and your life, maybe you should consider whether the work you're doing is really a part of your life.
Sure. Deep. Good answer.
I stood in some deep.
That's the drama. It's the drama in you coming out. Yeah, I think it got we'd like to say it triggered something. And that got me thinking about something personally.
Wow, it's a good question.
It's a great question. It's a great answer.
I wish I had anywhere near as good a question.
Well, this is now my question to you is, what is your question for the next guest?
From your very first job, the first job you were ever paid to do, what is one thing that you learned that you still put into practice on a daily basis in your work today?
Well, I know maybe not my first job, but Definitely lock your screen. Don't leave that on. Don't leave that open, because you've got some pranksters around you at the office space.
Oh man.
Cool. We will definitely ask that of the next guest, and we'll let you know what they say.
Excellent.
Yeah. I don't want to wrap it up just now,
Yeah.
because I'm thoroughly enjoying this. But I mean, we are getting to the end, unfortunately. But I knew this would be a great conversation. That's why when I saw you, just like, you know, it just clicked. Like, I've got to get you onto Blood, Sweat and Ideas. And I want to ask you now, when I invited you and you read through the document and we made the plan to get on here, what did you think when you read Blood, Sweat and Ideas? What triggered in your mind? You know, does that phrase have any meaning to you? What did it make you think of?
Well, right off the bat, I thought it was a fantastic name. It's an incredibly thought-provoking name, and I'm a big fan of playing with words. So, you know, so right off the bat, I think it's an excellent name. I think it's difficult to put into words. You know, blood, sweat, and tears. It's just so negatively couched. But switching it across to blood, sweat, and ideas, it completely changes the context of the blood.
Mm.
It completely moves it away from a zone of pain to one of, you know, of passion, of your, you know, your pulse, your heartbeat, you know, like what's at the core of you.
Yeah.
You know, like your purpose in life, you know. Your blood not as, you know, blood loss, but as
it's your life. It's your lifeblood. Yeah.
Your sweat, your effort, and your ideas. It's a fantastic turnaround for a very negative saying. I think that immediately struck me, and then reading through the document, I think there is a need for people to have more of these conversations. I see so much of this kind of content from European points of view, and from American points of view, Canadian points of view, and I don't think that they're irrelevant to us. I think there are a lot of lessons from those contexts.
100%.
But those people and those speakers and their insights weren't gained from the same context that we operate within, the same level of adversity that we fight against, the same level of innovation and novelty that we need to create to be successful here. We have terrifying stats in our country around businesses that survive past a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year horizon. I think it's 90% of our GDP is produced by small to medium micro enterprises.
Yeah.
And they are the most likely to close down in a pandemic. They are the least likely to have any form of financial support. To make it through your first 5 or 10 years of operation in any business in this country, you have to really, really innovate. You have to do something incredibly special. And I think from that point of view, these conversations taking place here, from these perspectives, maybe hold more weight in terms of inspiring people to try.
Yeah.
You know, it's all well and good to hear Simon Sinek talk about these great changes in leadership culture internationally. Are they taking place here? You know, and why are we not driving them taking place here? Adrian Gore does a lot of good work in this space, talking about these sorts of things. But he's one in many who's actually using social platforms to get a message out. You know.
So what is the success in your mind? So like, say, what is the change that I know it's a skills-based workforce is the change you want to create, but like your legacy, how will people remember yourself?
Well, yeah, I mean, here we start to get into a slightly, ethereal space, but I think we have a solid awareness of the fact that history helps us avoid mistakes.
Or we should lean on it more. We should look at it more. Should remember it more.
Yeah, I mean, but we mostly think of that in terms of massive societal events, wars, and ultimately every industry has a history, and we are part of a history, a narrative that tells a story of increasing employee and centricity and humanism. And any steps that we're able to make and facilitate towards a workplace culture that's more inclusive, that's more aware of the humanity of the people contributing, and teaches and treats people like grown-ups, and lets them contribute on their own terms with autonomy and without fear of reprisal. Any step that we make in that direction makes us part of a developmental process in society that's been taking place for thousands of years. If we can just be one step in that journey, that's enough. Obviously, if we're profitable and it lasts for a long time, we can have more of that impact over a longer period of time. But I don't think that needs to be seen as the key criteria for success. Just being part of the conversation, just changing someone's life, moving that needle is all that needs to happen for success. Ultimately, you want to wake up in the morning and you want to know that you're doing something that you can believe in. And, I think from that point of view, success is really easy to achieve, depending on how you define it.
Amazing. Andrew, thank you so much for being on the Blood, Sweat and Ideas podcast. I think we've covered an array of topics today. More so, I think for me, it was just hearing from your standpoint the importance of EQ within a business. I think it's something that I know personally we strive to implement here in DarkMatter. Like it's more of a prerequisite for us because it's the culture of the team. It's a dynamic because skills can be learned, right?
Yeah.
So, thanks so much. I think we've gone through an array of things, and I knew this would be a very interesting conversation. I know I've thoroughly enjoyed this.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and we'll have you again.
Epic.
Thank you so
I'd
much.
be very happy to come again, and maybe we can bring a couple of other people through the door.
Let's do it. We're gonna grow. We'll get some more cardboard cutout, some coasters.
They're really good at dampening the sound.
They really are, right?
Yeah. Maybe next time I'll bring an old yoga mat.
That's it. Oh, cut it up. That's it.
Yeah.
That's kind of innovation we need. But thank you so much. This is the end of Blood, Sweat and Ideas. See you at the next one.